Today, we are just continuing with our series on ABA and getting all the inside knowledge that I have and how we kind of go about implementing treatment. Hold on, let me get set up. I really don't like this new Zoom here. All right. So so we've kind of covered the big umbrella, right? Which is what we call ABA. Underneath that umbrella, we broke it up into two parts, the behavior management piece and the teaching skills piece. Now, we've gone over all the concepts like reinforcement, punishment, and extinction, and how we utilize those concepts to implement interventions that are going to change a child's behaviors. And so for us, this is one of the most integral pieces of what we're doing, which is to make sure that the child is in a position to learn. Because when they're engaging in a lot of protest behaviors, when they're engaging in maladaptive behaviors, when they're engaging in whatever behaviors you're talking about, without exception, all of those behaviors interfere with their ability to learn. Okay. So that's our biggest focus because if you can't change that, then it doesn't matter really how much your child learns because when you need them to, they should be displaying a skill that they have, they won't. Right? And in life, we have to do things on demand. We don't do things at our own leisure most of the time. So that's why when you are not as proficient at the behavior management piece, we really ask you to learn that piece really well because when you have that piece, however fast your child is able to learn, that's the speed that they're going to be able to learn. Okay. Now, we shifted our focus after we went over the behavior management piece over to the teaching skills piece of it. Okay. Now, we learned that discrete trial training and non-contingent teaching, shaping, chaining, all of these are specific strategies that we use, specific teaching strategies that we use that are kind of created from or arise from the principles of ABA. Okay. So, what are those principles that we're talking about? Well, we have the operant conditioning side and we have the classical conditioning side. The operant conditioning is learning through the consequences of our actions, and the classical conditioning side is learning through the associations that we build with our environment. And so that's what you have here is under operant conditioning. These are very, very specific methods, specific ways of doing things that teach using the operant conditioning principles. And last time we really dug into non-contingent teaching. We dug into its history, how we kind of found it out, how we kind of expanded on it. And so that's what we kind of really went over. And for us, non-contingent teaching, the basis for it really derives from classical conditioning. Okay. Remember that discrete trial training, because it's based on operant conditioning, it's based on a demand situation, which means like I'm telling you to do something, then you're either doing it or you're not doing it. And based on your response to my instruction, then I either reinforce you or give you an informational no so that you understand that what you do is wrong. Okay. If you're learning something, then I make sure that when I give you the instruction, I'm going to prompt you to be successful right from the get-go to make sure that you make a connection between the instructions I gave you and the response that is going to be reinforced. Non-contingent, on the other hand, is just based on these associations, right? Learning through the associations that we build from one stimuli to another stimuli. Okay. Now, the funny thing is that, when I started, everything that we taught was by discrete trial, like every single thing. That was the main methodology of teaching a skill set. And what we used to do is we teach everything receptively, meaning like, oh, understanding the language, like, oh, clap and knock, or, touch pencil, touch eraser, touch water bottle, touch this action, touch that color. We would teach that, and then we would teach the expressive side, which is like, oh, what is it? What color? What shape? What do you use it for? And so it always went into that progression, which is from receptive over to expressive. And that's the main method of teaching that I started with. Once we discovered non-contingent teaching, it just, because it was just such a powerful method, that methodology is our main method of teaching nowadays. Most language programs are taught in non-contingent. Yeah. Now, the funny thing is that even though we teach everything in non-contingent, it always has to end. The learning always has to end in discrete trial. The reasoning is that because we're building associations between items, okay, the child might kind of know under a non-demand situation. But like I said previously, it doesn't actually matter how many skills you have if you can't perform those skills when you need to perform those skills. So we take the same approach here, which is, even though in non-contingent you show me that you know something, I don't consider that item mastered until you can do it in discrete trial. Okay? So whether it's receptive and I tell you to touch something, or it's expressive and I ask you a question about it, you should be able to answer those questions under that demand condition. And only when that happens do we consider the item mastered or learned. Okay. So today we're gonna talk kind of a little bit ancillary to some of the main points that we've been going over. So we're gonna hit some things so that you kind of better understand how people learn. Hold on a second. Without that break and Eugene translating, I get more parched. All right. So in learning, there's something called discrimination and there's something called generalization. Yeah. Discrimination is, can you tell one thing from something else, right? So it can you tell, like, oh, is this a chihuahua versus is this a greyhound, or is this a, so even within the class of dogs, can you tell these apart? That's discrimination. Okay. Also, discrimination is, oh, can you tell that um all of these things are dogs, but this thing that looks like a dog, like a wolf or a coyote, is in fact not a dog, right? So you're discriminating stimuli. You can tell the difference between one item and something else. Now, generalization is, can you know that something is the same even though we never actually expressly taught you that thing? So what I mean is that when you teach a child something, like, okay, I teach them that this is a water bottle. For most kids with autism, if you go with a different type of water bottle, like a Costco brand water bottle, or a avian water or some, but the packaging looks slightly different, some kids will have a really hard time telling you, even though they learned this is a water bottle, you have something that's a little bit different and they can't tell. They don't know. Okay. And so that is a problem with generalization. Good generalization is, oh, you learn water bottle is this, but I can show you any variation of a water bottle, and you're still able to tell me that's a water bottle. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to go on and kind of more kind of hopefully clarify the distinction between discrimination and generalization. So let's say that you taught the dog, that's the label that you're teaching it, and this is the stimuli that you use to teach dog. Yeah. Now, if you show the child a slightly different picture of a dog, and they're still able to tell you, hey, that's a dog, that's generalization. Okay? I show a different picture of a dog, they can still say, hey, that's still a dog. That's generalization. Again, another different looking type of dog, but they still say dog. Okay. However, what if I show them a hyena and they label it a dog? Okay. We call that overgeneralization, okay, and a lack of discrimination. Okay, so your child has now extrapolated that anything like with fur and with four legs, that has a snout, anything like that is going to be considered a dog. Okay, so that is overgeneralization, and that kind of crosses outside what you want them to learn. Okay. Now, if you show them this and they don't identify that as a dog, then you have good discrimination. So all these items within the green are good generalization. Anything that falls out of it is good discrimination. So I show them fox, they can identify that's not a dog. I can show them a bear, and they say, hey, that's not a dog either. Okay, that's all instances of good generalization. Now, when we talk about, we talked a little bit about overgeneralization. Well, what happens if we show them an actual dog, but they identify it as, oh, that's not a dog, right? Well, when that happens, we call this process over discrimination. Okay, that you are not including into that category what belongs in that category. Okay, and this is also bad. All right, so overgeneralization is bad, over discrimination is bad. Why? Because the child can't tell the difference between one item and another, or they don't include something that should be included in what you're teaching. All right. Now, when we kind of go about working with kids, because we know that our kids have this specific difficulty with discrimination and generalization, and we're going to talk a little bit about generalization first. When we know for sure they have a hard time with generalization, then you have to program for it. Okay? So built into our program is that every child works with a group of therapists. I don't mean like, oh, okay, like five or six people would work with one child at the same time. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is on any one child's team, there's like anywhere from 3 to 5 staff members. And whenever we bring someone new in, they'll be a part of the team. Somebody older from the team leaves that team. And so this child is constantly exposed to different people. So when we do that, what we're practicing is programming different teachers in so that the child doesn't over discriminate, meaning like, oh, if I only work with one person, I might respond beautifully to that one person, but nobody else. Okay. And that is a failure in treatment. You want the child to be able to answer any questions that anybody asks your child, right? That's the goal. So for us, we actually make it a point in treatment to make sure that every child has multiple people that they interact with. And the more people that we can get in over the long term, the better it is for all the kids. Same thing when we're teaching things like water bottle, right? When we do it non-contingently, a lot of times we'll find at least three, sometimes up to five different examples of water bottle, different examples of shoe if we're teaching shoe, different examples of pencils if we're teaching pencils. And what we're doing is every time we call them over, we're using a slightly different example to teach. Okay? So that way, when they learn water bottle, they would have learned the variety of water bottles that come in this world, right? As many variations as you can at the very onset. We call that multiple exemplars, right? Like multiple examples of all the different things that the child may experience, that this is still the same thing, no matter how different it might look like. So we do that on a regular basis. Like, oh, whenever we teach a program, we're trying to find stimuli that varies. Okay? Same thing if I'm teaching a child to uh, sight read. Okay? When we teach a child sight read, we don't use one font. Okay? We'll use like five different fonts each time that we're teaching a child to sight read so that they can just tell you like, oh, okay, that's the same word, even though it's a slightly different font. Or maybe it's not even a slightly different font. It might be a really different looking font, but they can still identify that as the word that you're teaching them. Now, the other thing is we also teach the child to vary their responses. Okay. So what that means is that we want to teach them to answer the same question in different ways. Okay. So things like, oh, how are you? I'm good, doing good, not bad. Nah, I'm okay. Like different responses to the exact same question so that they're varied. Okay. The funny thing is, like, the biggest criticism of ABA is that we make our kids like robots, right? Like that, like, oh, input, output. Okay. If you ever worked or seen us work with kids, and we, for me, embody the ideal of ABA, right? When you see our kids, we don't churn out robots, we churn out kids. Okay. And generally speaking, when you have people that aren't very proficient at ABA, that don't really understand it, what they do is create robots. Okay, so it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from bad ABA. Okay, and what we're trying to teach everybody is how to do good ABA, so that at the end of the day, you have a child that is functioning better, that interacts, that is able to build relationships, build friendships, live as happy and a productive of a life as they possibly can. All right. So for us, we program for this generalization piece, and that's something that I would highly recommend all parents do as well. It's a lot harder at home. Why? Because, like, oh, if you're the primary teacher of your child, it's harder to get that different that your child responding to different people. But that's why you have to, like, oh, hook your friends in, hook your family in, get them to be good at getting your child to respond to the things that they're capable of responding to. All right. Um, Now, when we talk about discrimination is a huge, huge thing, right? Because if you can't tell one thing from another, that's going to impact your ability to learn. Okay? So, usually we go through something called block trials, okay? And block trials is just one way that we kind of teach a child to discriminate. Now, I'm not going to actually go over block trials because honestly, I barely do the training on block trials at our company either. Like because when we go and we find, oh, a child's confusing two things, we just go into problem solving mode, okay? And trying to figure out how can we get this child to clearly discriminate these two processes or these two items. Now, if you kind of scale back and look back at some of the streams that I've done, what you'll see is we've kind of gone over methods and ways that we do this, right? And one of the ways was like, oh, overemphasizing specific sounds. A specific example I used was teaching a child to be able to discriminate between how are you and how old are you. And that's a common discrimination mistake that kids make. Some other easy mistakes that our kids make, not being able to distinguish arms out versus arms up. Okay? So we would just kind of problem solve, like, oh, what are they having a hard time with? And most of the time, it's they have a hard time hearing that what you're asking them to do. So sometimes it's I hear arms and I immediately guess which one you're asking for instead of actually listening to the key word that tells you, oh, it's up, arms up versus arms out. Okay. Then for us, we have to make sure that they attend to that specific part of the instruction in order for them to listen and perform correctly. Okay. So that's what we do in discrimination training. We just kind of try to figure it out, like with some kids, like, oh, they have a hard time telling smiles and frowns. So instead of having the whole face, we blow up the person's mouth, so they're either smiling or they're mad or and we kind of just zone into that area and then we have them match those so that they can start to attend to, oh, this is what I'm looking at, this is what I'm paying attention to. Now I'm going to go back a little bit and I don't remember if I've talked about this or not. I probably have because I repeat the same stories over and over again. um, but they did a study. EVAR actually did a study, and it's about identifying gender based on Ken and Barbie. So they taught the child to identify man and woman based on Ken and Barbie. Okay? Then they did something funny, which is they switched Barbie and Ken's shoes. Okay, that's all they did. Guess what happened? The child's response is switched along with them. So the child over attended to one aspect of learning man and woman, which is the shoes. Okay. And then as soon as you switch the shoes, their responding switched along with it. All right. So that's the thing is that when the child doesn't pay attention to the right aspects of something, we'll use things like word cards. We'll use overemphasis. How are you? How old are you? Okay. We use those different things to help the child be able to understand, oh, this one is the correct response and not that one. All right. And so most of the time for us, we're just problem solving. We're trying to figure out in what way does the child unable to discriminate and how can we get them to pay attention to the parts that matter. All right. Okay, so today we're gonna get into shaping, chain, and chaining. Okay, those are two other procedures that I've talked about under operant conditioning, but I don't think we have, um, but we haven't gone over yet. Okay, now under chaining we have three different types of chaining. We have backward, forward, and total task, and we'll go into that in depth in a little bit here. But the first thing we're going to talk about is what is shaping. Okay. Now, when it comes to shaping, what you have to think about is, well, I don't know if it's a very old film, and it's an old US film, Ghost, right? And one of the iconic scenes in Ghost is this, the ceramics, like the pottery clay, and them molding that pottery clay, and so that's really what shaping is, right? Shaping is, oh, you have a behavior or you have a way of saying things, and this is this big glob that's not a vase, right? It's not a pot. It's nothing, right? And shaping is you're just using reinforcement to shape it, shape the behavior into what you want over time. Okay? All right, so what does that actually mean? All right, let's give you a very concrete example of what that might actually look like. All right, so let's say that you're trying to get the child to say ice cream. You have a picture that you want them to identify it, but they have a really hard time pronouncing it. huh? So maybe they say ish karin, like very, very difficult. Okay? Now, the thing is, for all of us, when we respond, we have a variety of responses. Like 90% of the time, we respond this way, but 10%, I'm sorry, 5% will respond worse, and sometimes we respond better. Okay. So when we take a look at this, most of the time, we'll go ahead and reinforce what you're able to say most of the time, right? But we're going to try to push you so that you say it a little bit better. Okay. So if you say it even a little bit better, huge celebration. We provide more reinforcement for that, So if like we're gonna accept like Ish Kareem, um, if we accept that for right now, I might just give you like, oh, that's good. I'll give you a small little taste of ice cream. However, you go and you go, Ish Kareem, okay? You get closer. I'll give you a huge spoonful. I might give you a cupful, because I want that behavior to increase and increase, increase until such time as that becomes the new normal. Okay. So that starts to move from this edge over here of being not frequently done into this, like, oh, now it's happening most of the time. Now your criteria is going to change. Okay. So when they say it before and you still reinforce it, you're no longer reinforcing it. You're probably giving them no, you're ignoring it. It's only when they say it in this nicer way that they'll get the ice cream. But again, now the ice cream is tapered down. Okay. That you used to be able to give like a cupful when they say it this way. Okay. But now you're going and you're giving just a spoonful when they say it this way. It's only when they say it better than this way that they get the cup. Okay? All right. And that's what you just continually do is that as everything shifts from the edges, you know, oh, this is the best he's ever done to, oh, this is what he does regularly, your criteria changes. Okay. You tighten the criteria. It's going to take more to get what they wanted. It has to be clearer and clearer responding. Okay. And that's what you're doing is you're slowly kind of moving it along, moving along. You're shaping the behavior until they can say ice cream really nicely. And that's the only time they get reinforced is when they say it nicely and not any other approximations before that. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody in terms of like, oh, how we would kind of use this shaping procedure to help improve a skill set. Oh, did I might, I don't know why that. Okay, I'm just gonna delete that. I don't know what that was. All right, so onward to chaining. Okay. Now, chaining is basically links in a chain. That's what you're thinking about. Links in a chain. Okay. And we have three different approaches to teaching using these links in a chain approach. We have forward chaining, backward chaining, and total task. So chaining basically is the child has a lot of different behaviors that make up this broader, larger behavior, right? Like, oh, brushing teeth. Oh, the skill of brushing teeth involves a whole lot of small steps, small links in the chain. Oh, from wetting your toothbrush to putting toothpaste on the toothbrush to starting in some section of brushing teeth to transitioning to other section to transitioning to another section to rinsing your mouth, all of those kind of things, right? Okay. So it's used to teach these more kind of complex behaviors that have a lot of different components in there in order for the child to be able to be successful and independent with that task. So when we take a look at what the difference between forward chaining and backward chaining are, forward chaining starts with the beginning, the start of that chain. Okay. And we teach that until you learn it before we go on to the next step in that chain. Okay. When you take a look at backward chaining, it's the complete opposite. We start with the last step until you learn the last step. Then we'll teach the second to last step. Okay. And until you learn the second to last step and finish off with the last step, only when you can do those independently do we add the third to the last step, and so on and so on and so on until the child's able to do the whole chain. Now, the difference between forward chaining and backward chaining and total task is that in forward and backward chaining, you learn either the first task or the last task, but you learn it and nothing happens until you learn it. So we're not going to add additional links to the chain until you've learned what you needed to learn. Total task is different. Total task is we're going to work on everything. Every link in the chain, we're going to work on at the exact same time. Okay? Now, the difference is that we're going to help the child depending on what step they needed help on. So on this step, oh, they just needed me to show them what to do. Oh, in this step, I needed to grab their hands to have them do it. Oh, in this hand, all I needed to do was, you know, some sort of gestural, something to remind them about what they need to do. And so we're using different levels of prompting and different levels based on how well the child can perform each step, with the idea that over time, as they learn it, we withdraw the prompts until they can do every single step of that chain all by themselves. All right, so let's take a look at washing hands. Okay, let's say that these are all the steps that we are teaching the child in order for them to appropriately wash their hands by themselves. So we have them turn on the water, wet their hands, get the soap, and by together, I mean rub them together, right over left, left over right, and then together. And funny enough, this is the same sequence we teach all of our kids, right? We teach them to be really good hand washers, really useful during the height of COVID, right? But for us, it's a hygiene thing, and you want the child to maintain hygiene, which is why we're so kind of rigid in terms of, oh, wanting to make sure their hand washing is at that level. Okay. All right. So then, they rinse all the bubbles off, they dry their hands. Okay. So that's the whole sequence. In forward chaining, you're just going to say, wash your hands, and all they have to do is turn on the water. That's it. Right? You reinforce them, things like that. In the beginning, they might not know your instructions. So what you're doing, like turn on the water, you prompt them to turn it on. Yay, great job. You turn off the water, turn on the water, you grab their hand, you make them turn it on. Whoa, that's awesome. Right? You do the same thing until they're independent with it. You don't move on until they're really good with it. I can just tell them, wash your hands, and by themselves, they'll turn on the water. Once they've learned that, then we teach the next step in the sequence. Okay. So we'll say, wash your hands. They'll turn on the water. Then we help them wet their hands. Okay. We do that until they can do both steps all by themselves. As they wash your hands, they turn on the water, they water their hands, right? They get their hands wet. Okay. They can do both those steps by themselves. Then we teach the third step. Okay. We help them out until they get independent with that step, until they can get all three steps. You say, wash your hands, they dispense the soap, they wet their hands. I'm sorry, they turn on the water, they wet their hands, they get the soap, until they can get all that stuff in. Then you just keep on going down the chain until the child's able to do every single step on their own. Right? Backward chaining, yeah, you're just going backwards. All right. So it started with the first step, you start with the last step. Okay. So you say wash your hands, but really you're just having them use the steps to dry their hands. Okay. When they can do that successfully, then you add the rinsing part. Okay. So you just keep on doing the exact opposite of what you would do in forward chaining. Okay. But with each step that you teach, you're going to help them be successful. And then all the other steps that they've already learned, they need to perform on their own. Okay. So when I teach wet hands, after I get them to wet their hands, getting the soap, rubbing it together, right over left, left over right, rubbing them together again, rinsing and drying off, they should be able to do completely on their own. Okay. And so that's what we do until they can get every single step down. Okay. Total task, we're teaching all the steps. Okay. But we're providing different levels of assistance for each step. So if the child's able to turn on the water on their own, we just let them. Okay. But when it's like, oh, when they wet their hands, they still need some sort of physical prompting, some partial physical prompting to be successful. Right. And so for every single step, we have a slightly different level of assistance that we give them. And so what we're trying to do all the time is retreat, take some of that assistance away, see how well they can perform as we kind of reduce the amount of help that they get. Okay. By and far, if they can't get it, then we up the prompting to make sure that they can get that step until they can get that step really good. Now, for us, we generally speaking always use total task chaining for hand washing because it makes no sense. Like you're gonna have to wash your hands anyways, so it makes no sense for me at least to teach you only the first step or only the last step. So for us, when we teach it, we'll teach all the steps because they're gonna have to wash their hands anyways, and we'll only provide help where they needed the help. Okay? Now, for some tasks like forward chaining, I love using forward chaining to teach like tying shoes. Okay, why? Because the most complicated step in tying shoe is usually toward the later end. Because like, oh, you either like, oh, now I have two, bunny ears that now I have to wrap and I have to put through. Or, oh, I have one bunny ear. I have to learn to wrap the other one and poke the shoelace through. One of those things is happening, right? And so the initial steps tend to be the easiest steps, and you want them to be successful in the very onset of stuff. So in the beginning, you can break it down a whole lot of different ways. For me, what I tend to do is I'll just teach them with the laces all undone. I'll tell them tie your shoes, and then they just move one lace and cross it over. Okay, and we do that until they're able to do that all by themselves. Right, tie your shoes, they move it over. Good. Now I'm going to teach the next step. Right, so I'll say tie your shoes. They put the first one. I prompt them, grab their hand, cross over the other way, right? We do that until they're independent with it. When I just say tie your shoes, they go cross and cross. Okay? Then I teach them to tuck the one that's crossed over, tuck that underneath, okay, and pull it out and tighten it. So we have our first tie. Okay. In the beginning, we're helping them, like, oh, we're grabbing their finger, we're teaching them how to poke it through, how to grab it, how to tighten it, you know. So we go through all of those steps, right? Until they can, when I tell tie your shoes, they go boop, 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 boom. Okay. Once they do that, then we add the next step. Oh, okay, we teach them to get a bunny ear, right? And that's for us how we've taught tying shoelaces because we found out that that's the most effective for us. Now, for some kids, we'll make adjustments and things like that, but we always make adjustments because every child's different. So if the child doesn't respond in a particular way to the method of teaching or whatnot, we'll always change it up because we have to be good teachers. We're adapting to the needs of the child. Okay? Now, backward chaining, I tend to always use if I'm teaching puzzles, like a child has never learned how to play puzzles, so we're teaching them how to play with puzzles. So in that instance, then what we would do is I take one piece of the puzzle out, okay? And if we're starting at the very beginning, it might be I take it out and it's like just slightly ajar. Okay. And it's like play with puzzle. And then I prompt the child just to nudge that piece in so that it kind of lands into the its proper spot. Right. And so I keep on doing this and I make it harder and harder for them. I churn it, I do all that stuff until I can take one piece out, play with puzzle, and they put it in to finish the puzzle. Okay. Now, along with all this stuff, once they finish it, then I have them kind of pick it up, clean it up, and do that because then to me it makes sense. Like, oh, you finish with something, you clean up after yourself with it, right? So that's why I like backward chaining in that instance because you kind of end naturally. Okay, you end with the task being done. And I like that for the toy play stuff. I like that for puzzle play. I like that for shape sorters and teaching those kind of things. So we start at the last stage and then we progressively increase the stages until, oh, I take two pieces out, I take three pieces out, I take four pieces out until you can complete the whole puzzle on your own. And that's why we generally use backwards chaining for that. Whew. All right. So that's what shaping is. That's what chaining is. Okay. But those, both of those are about like, oh, how do I go about breaking tasks down or you're not able to accomplish something today? Okay. So it's shaping like, oh, you have a hard time saying it, and over time, I'm going to use reinforcement, and I'm going to use differential reinforcement, meaning like, oh, when you say it better, you're going to get more of the item that you're looking for. When you say it not as good, you're going to get less of that item, and then there's clear cutoff for I'm not accepting these responses at all. And you're always going to kind of shifting the response over, shifting the response over, shifting the response over until it's exactly the way that you want. Versus chaining is, oh, here's a complex behavior, and we're figuring out what the best method of chaining is going to be. Is it total task? Is it forward chaining? Is it backward chaining? And I gave you some examples of the ones that we generally use. All right, that's all I prepared for today. So, now we do have a question today, and I coincidentally am done with the lecture-based part of it. Um, so since we're done a little bit early, why don't we go ahead and answer the question?
Yeah, Bob, do you know if you could um put in permission? Because I'm trying to upload an image in our chat. Um,
Oh, in the chat. Hmm.
yeah, and it says I'm unable to send file due to admin restriction. Are
Oh,
you do you have the I was wondering if you have the thing to add edit chats. If not,
you might
I
need to
think I'll
cacao
just
it. You might need to cacao it to me if you can.
I think I'll just send a copy paste version because initially I took a screenshot of the question and was going to send it to you, but I think it's just better to just copy paste the text in.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So it's just one question anyway. So 네, 그러면은 질문 하나 들어온 거 있기 때문에 이것만 전달해 드리고 마치도록 하겠습니다. Here's the first part and here's the second part. So
Well,
this person sent it in English, so I think this person understands English well enough. Yeah.
okay. All right. So let me go ahead and say what the question is so that everybody knows it. 44-month-old son recently started kindergarten in February, attends 5 days per fortnight, in addition to 4 days at childcare. 5 days per fortnight? That's not a term I've heard. What does that actually mean, Eugene?
Fortnight. That's actually not a term. I think, oh, it's 14 days, every 14 days.
Oh, okay. All right. Um,
So 2 weeks. Yeah.
okay. So he's settling in well with EA support at kindergarten. I don't know what EA support is either. So I'm really sorry. Uh, Following instructions is a bit challenging for him, especially when it comes to following rules. He seems to take it as a game rather than taking it seriously. His play therapist mentioned that he tends to avoid showing what he can't do. I think that's one of the reasons he likes going to daycare than kindergarten, which has less rules and instructions to follow. He can make 2 or 3 word combinations in Korean, but starts copying words in English. He says more intonated babbles a lot in English. His receptive English is not bad as he understands at least simple instructions, but somehow he doesn't want to listen and varies a lot depending on his mood. How to support him improving instructions, uh, improve him following instructions. They live in Australia, by the way. Okay. All right. So the thing is that we talk a lot about compliance, right? Because honestly, your child probably knows a lot. They just only demonstrate it when they feel like demonstrating that skill. That's why we talked a lot about the behavior management side, which is there is no option not to respond. Everything you know you're going to respond with. So when we go to school with our kids, the teacher tell them something, we make them do it. Okay? Doesn't matter what it is, we're making them comply with the instructions. Same thing with home therapy. Okay, we start with basic receptive instructions and we make them follow all those instructions. Doesn't matter from who, that kind of thing until um, he's good with that. Okay. We have a little bit more information come in. He loves outdoor play, but seems to struggle with fine motor skills, especially during table tasks. Drawing and coloring are challenging for him. He finds them boring and hard to stay interested. Okay. Um, most of the activities that he's going to end up doing are going to be hard for him. Okay. Very few things are going to be really easy for him. And so that's something that, we work through in an ABA program, which is, we get the child to, we work on those things that are hard for them. We work on their fine motor imitation skills. We work on their fine motor strength and conditioning. We build up all of those things so they're not as challenging for the child. That engaging in any of these tasks gets easier and easier with more and more practice you know so that's the big thing is like, oh, how do you support it? The thing is, at home you have to make sure anything that he knows how to do, he always has to do. When you tell him to do something, yeah, you have to follow through. You have to make the child listen to you. Okay. If he has someone to support him in the class, that's what that supporter has to do. They have to follow through. They have to make sure If another kid asks him a question, they make him answer that question. If the teacher tells the class to do something, they make the child listen to what the teacher is asking them to do. Okay? That's the basic premise here, is that your child is doing everything when he wants to do it. Okay? And in ABA therapy, you're upending this relationship. You're making it so that you're the king. Okay? You're not allowing your child to dictate, this is when I want to do something. This is when we're going to do this or do that. Okay? All right. So I don't know if that really answers your question or not. Hopefully, it gives you some clarification. You can understand everything better. But let me know if I missed a point in there. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Additionally, she or he also added in last bit that his listening fluctuates a little bit also depending on how hard or how many instructions are involved. But yeah, that was the final two lines of detail that was added in the real time chat.
Okay. And that's normal. Like, like what you're saying, oh yeah, like that's perfectly normal. But the thing is, if they're still inconsistent with listening for things that they can easily do, well, why would you expect them to listen for something hard? It just, they won't. Okay. So you have to get them to listen to you for everything that they know every single time you ask them to do it. Get that consistent. And then you have a much better chance of them listening for things that are harder for them. But if they refuse to listen for things that are easy for them, they're going to much more likely resist listening to anything hard. All right. Well, this series is close to conclusion, I think. Okay, I'll have to kind of review all my notes, make sure like I've got over all the areas that I really wanted to go over. Um, and then it'll be time to answer questions, So anything that we've gone over, anything that uh, has left you kind of bewildered or like, I still don't quite understand this. Now's the time for you to kind of flood our cafe, flood the channel with these questions so that then we can dedicate at least one, possibly a couple of streams to kind of revisit some areas and to make sure those areas are nice and understandable for everybody. All right. Well, like always, we really appreciate everyone taking time out of their day to listen to our channel. Before you leave, please remember to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and please tell all your friends about us. All right. We'll see everyone next time. Bye bye.